After weeks of denial and resentment, the French government has finally agreed to pull out all its soldiers from Niger by the end of this year. All 1,500 French soldiers and their equipment based in Niger will have completely left the country as it was declared by the French President Emmanuel Macron. In the meantime, the French ambassador, who had initially refused to leave the country after losing his diplomatic immunity, is also no longer in Niger as he has been recalled by his country. But the main problem is, why would France, a major superpower country for decades, agree to bow under the rules established by the legitimate regime of a very poor country with nothing at all threatening to France? Well, the answer might be complicated than you think. Of course, Niger is strategically located and it is the 7th producer of uranium globally. France is the biggest beneficiary of this wealth as it uses 60% of the Nigerian uranium in its power plants. But besides that, Niger had other many importance to France, which made it very hard to simply let it slip away from its authority. Niger came after Burkina Faso and Mali, at the former French colonies, had military coups of their own, which literally turned them into the lost cause for France. Niger, in particular, was very important not only because of its resources, but also because of how its former president Mohamed Bazoum had embraced the Western style of leadership, which made him a darling of the West, especially France and the United States of America. However, nodding to his colonial masters was not what his citizens wanted, and that's why they widely exploded in the streets of Niamey when the news spread that he was no longer in charge of their country. His successor, General Abdurrahmane Tiani, who topped him, had no time to waste as he had to deal with the threat of invasion by ECOWAS, which was widely supported by France. It is reported that Paris went as far as sending weapons in countries like Benin, Senegal, and Cote d'Ivoire in the effort to support this cause. On the other side, France went full in diplomatically, robbing countries to cut off trade with Niger and to impose sanctions on that giant country. The strategy worked very well, but right when everything was falling into the right place, France had the biggest setback of this plan, and that was another military coup in Gabon. Now, for decades, Gabon has been the backbone of the French policy in West Africa, especially through the help of the Bongo family. France reacted very conservatively to the coup in Gabon, which basically weakened its position on the situation in Niger. It wouldn't make sense for France to help ECOWAS member countries to invade Niger in order to reinstate a legitimate president who was elected by the population, and refuse to do the same in Gabon, another member of ECOWAS, which also had exactly the same problem. If France would have reacted on the Nigerian side but left Gabon untouched, its biased response would ruin its reputation, which was already bad enough. Another big factor in this surprising give-up has something to do with former French colonies. You see, Mali and Burkina Faso had declared that anyone who would invade Niger would have to be ready to fight their forces as well. This automatically meant that the war in Niger would not only be contained inside Niger, but had a very good chance to spread across the whole West African countries. Now, this was a huge risk for France for two big reasons. First, it is understandable that the whole West African region would completely collapse and the human cost would be so high. But secondly, such a plan would likely make the situation far worse for France than simply closing their eyes on yet another African country, in this case Niger, slipping away from their influence. You see, there is a huge anti-French sentiment in West Africa, which would be extremely exacerbated by the spreading war promoted by Paris. In that regard, there is a strong possibility that countries like Cote d'Ivoire, Benin, Senegal, Togo, Cameroon, and others who were already comfortable under the French influence might be the next ones to be attacked by the revolutionists. In that scenario, France would lose completely, which is different from now, as it still has some countries whose leaders are very much happy to remain under their influence. Though it's difficult for France to rebuild the same empire, it still has a good number of strong countries under its influence, and if there is any hope to regain the lost countries, those countries under the influence would play a pivotal role in the future. The alternative to that is that it would be completely impossible for France to rebuild its African empire if the majority of countries step out of its influence. So it's better for France to lose Niger as one country instead of risking to lose almost all countries if the war breaks out and it destroys everything. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to get more African coverage.